Well, welcome everyone to the latest installment of DHCD's Creating Community Vitality series focused on public spaces, specifically action-based empathic design, thinking methods for equitable design. I am Kyle Meyer with DHCD's Community Revitalization Office, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. So, little housekeeping as usual. To reduce background noise and distraction, please mute yourself and optionally turn off your camera. That provides a little bit more focus on our speaker. Look for the little microphone and camera at the bottom center of your browser window. We are recording the webinar, so shortly after the presentation handout and recording will be available on virginiamainstreet.com. So look out for that. There will be a Q&A opportunity at the end, so please use the chat feature to ask questions, but feel free to enter your questions in chat at any point. I will incorporate the question into the presentation at an opportune time. So find that chat feature in the bottom right-hand corner of the browser. So I always like to do a little bit of a test. Make sure you guys are paying attention, but speaking of chat, let's test your skills. So what is the number one thing you would like to learn today about creating public spaces? I'll give you a moment to answer that. What is the number one thing you would like to learn today about creating public spaces? So use that chat feature. Love to hear what you're most curious about. And lean in. Ask some good questions, and you'll get the information you're looking for. Here we go. How to draw people to your town and where the funding opportunities are. So creating those public spaces that are welcoming and attractive. How to activate those public spaces and make them usable. Ways to implement beautification. Second Jenny, that's right on, Taylor. How to create spaces that feel welcoming and inviting to all, so equitable and available and comfortable to visitors, to the residents. How to garner support from community for new ideas. Oh, some public input. I like that. Well, I think you're in the right place. And to create investment from people who live in town. I like that. Absolutely. And how to incorporate natural elements in public spaces. How to furnish spaces to facilitate activity. Yeah, how to take communities, what's that first step to implementation? This is good. Thank you, everybody. And so Elgin, maybe this is a little bit of a cue and some things to dive into when you get a chance, but I had the feeling that a lot of what you'll be talking about shortly will fall into those categories. All right, so let's get started. So this is the 10th installment of the Creating Community Vitality series. The intent is to provide inspiration, ideas, and resources to help position your community for success by ensuring local amenities, infrastructure, and social offerings are in place to retain and attract an increasingly mobile workforce. The series is organized around three key themes: identity, recognizing your community's core strengths around place, people, and the leadership pipeline; ecosystems, exploring the systems that support successful business startup, tourism, housing, and worldwide connectivity; and our third and final theme is where we are now, is community, strengthening public spaces that encourage interaction, inviting cultural events that celebrate local foods and history, and involving everyone to affect change. So we reinforce the monthly topics through DHCD's Partners for Better Communities podcast and Virginia Main Street's blog posts. So go to virginiamainstreet.com to learn about what's upcoming and even the past recorded webinars and podcasts. You can find all the links on virginiamainstreet.com in the Creating Community Vitality tab. So in today's webinar, you will learn about empathic design, designing with empathy, where designers learn about and understand the end users of their spaces to create better solutions that meet their needs. Our speaker is Elgin Cleckley, an associate professor of architecture at UVA with an appointment in the School of Education and the School of Nursing. He is a designer, director, and principal of Empathic Design, a design thinking pedagogy, initiative, and professional practice focusing on intersections of identity, culture, history, memory, and place. And I just have to say this because it is not a word I use often, but what pedagogy really comes down to is the study of teaching methods. So with that, I think the chances are good that you will retain some new knowledge after the webinar is over. Glad to have you. Elgin, welcome. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and ask you to bring up your title slide. And then I have a few questions for you so that we can learn a little bit more about you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kyle. Let me know if you can see that there.
Let's see. You are presenting. You're in good shape.
Perfect.
Thank you. All right, I got a few questions for you. So a little rapid fire. Just to get to know you a little bit better and so that the audience feels comfortable and connected. So I love that you're an architect. You're also a teacher, and you're certainly embracing some progressive and innovative methodologies for design. So what is the career highlight that you were most proud of?
Oh, what a wonderful question. It's right now. I am so excited to be back in Virginia, where I actually went to my undergraduate at University of Virginia. I went to middle school, high school in Virginia as well. And I went out from the learnings I've had here, not only in this state and experiences, but also in education. Went out, had a design career, and came back. And so it's a beautiful closing loop of, coming back to where you learned, it's like a hometown moment.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think a lot of us here can empathize with you. So we love Virginia. I'm from Virginia myself. Here I am working for the Commonwealth. Wonderful. All right, number two. How has your perspective of the world changed over time?
It's a daily occurrence. I try to push myself as much as possible to see the world from different points of view. So it's, for me, over time is a daily moment and thing. So I'm always thinking, trying to see and imagine. So it's always a constant.
Yeah, that's good. Hey, the world is changing constantly, and we all have to adapt to it. We've certainly experienced that more than any time, I think, over the last couple of years. But day to day, you are right. There are constant new challenges and changes that take place. We're human. All right, so this one's going to be a little less heavy. So what is your favorite way to spend a day off?
Lately, it's hiking. Trees just blow my mind. And so I just like looking and learning more about trees. I have such high respect for them. I think I wish they could talk.
Yeah. Hey, I love how they share sunlight so that all of the trees all prosper. Yay, trees. And even tree bathing intrigues me. Just going for that walk and brushing off everything, and just being present where you are. So I can identify with that. Well, Elgin, this is great. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand the reins to you, and I cannot wait to hear what you have to say about empathic design. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Kyle, and thank you to everyone for joining. Can you all hear me? I hear an echo here and there. I don't know if that's coming through. Is that better? Perfect. I want to thank you all so much for taking the time out of your busy day to listen to my ideas about empathic design. But I wanted to start off with something, and it's an exercise that I use in classes, also in community, in my practice, just to start to see the world from other perspectives. So with this idea, I just have one request, and that's just for you to close your eyes, if you don't mind, where you are right now. Now that your eyes are closed, I'd like for you to think about this idea of what we just came from. Our digital window is a portal through space, time, and place. Think about that window that you just saw before you closed your eyes as a space that helps you discover, decipher, understand us, our story, and our narrative. Now let's forget our worries while our eyes are closed. Don't worry about if you left that on or should you have said that yesterday. Instead, think about that bottom left-hand corner where your screen name was, shifting into numbers. Those numbers go into years and they move backward. As they scroll, notice the temperature of your space. Is it hot? Is it cold? Feel the effects on your skin, your face. What great weather we're going to have this week. Think about the last time you were bitten by a bug. Sink into your chair if you're sitting. Feel the heaviness of your feet if you're standing. As you sink, you're rooted into an imaginary space, one that many have walked before. As you sink, you also feel like you're floating. If you're standing, you're floating even higher. You can see this imaginary world around you from above. Duck, a bird just flew by. Mist, now we're in a cloud. You probably feel the wind at your back. It's also cutting from the front. Each breath inhales miles, kilometers, distance, and time. But before you see it, it's coming clear as you pull into a harbor. With your eyes still closed, it comes into view. Layers, compression, past, present, and future. If you could please open your eyes. Did this exercise with a current design studio, working with students who are looking at Lower Manhattan and imagining that here, you feel it, you find it. We can recognize the World Trade Center. You blink, it's Manhattan, hilly island with fruits, nuts, birds, animals in abundance. To the left, migrant birds, seals, whales, dolphins, estuary glory. What year is this? A New York City water jet taxi goes by us. A helicopter heads toward the East River waterfront. 6 jet skiers. Further to the right, a ship, cargo, human, darkened skin. Somehow you feel the distance it's traveled. It moves towards Pearl and Water Street, a Verizon store. Blank, it's New York's municipal slave market under a triangular wooden enclosure. Coastline looks much higher back under the FDR. Lenape families, bark-covered domed houses, hunting, fishing, JP Morgan building. If you look here at the bottom, you'll see that that's Abdu Hussein. He's a student in the current design studio. And in the studio, after this exercise, he came up with these images to think about sight and space. Kyle, let's check for a second. Is there an issue with the sound? Hopefully y'all can hear me.
You're a little glitchy for me, but no one has spoken up that there are any problems. Usually when there are sounds. All right, Kate says it sounds great, so
awesome.
It might just be me.
Okay,
so I would say continue on.
Sure will. Thank you. So you can imagine this as a way to think about the world, to think about our spaces, to think about where we are from other perspectives. I do really capture this in an amazing way. And you'll see this at the Smithsonian. We're doing an exhibition on Empathic Design's work in April of 2022. I see this when I look at the world, and I think about it as a system of these layers, this idea of the natural, the social, the cultural, the historical, the environmental, and the political. And to think about any public space being a navigation and a moving between what you see, what happened, and what's there. I'll show a project in a little bit. It happened here in Charlottesville, but in that is to discover this idea of empathy, this idea of the modifications of ourself, the relationships, our shift and change. And to that other great question that Kyle asked, as you move through these layers, you're always researching and thinking about those possibilities as a foundation to set up designs. I come from this honestly. I've worked for several decades in empathic projects, starting in schools in Washington State, the idea of setting up new civic locations that really speak to a community based on community design. That building on the left there is a Robert Gray Elementary School, where we interviewed local residents to think about the fact that there were two large companies, Alcoa and Weyerhaeuser, using those materials in the space so that you could actually understand the ecosystem of life in Longview, Washington. To mausoleum design in Toronto, thinking about those moments of deep compassion through materials and also procession at the Requiem Mass. But I really understood a deep idea of empathic design as the design coordinator at the Ontario Science Centre in Toronto. Here we designed a brand new outdoor space, all for community, completely free. In that space, we ran an international art competition. Within it, kids could come up, adults, and play on that water fontaine or piano you see in the center. We're sure to articulate moments that would happen in that space for public events. Also, the idea that anyone could come before going into the building to have a moment of enjoyment. This also connected to art projects that were either outside that connected to the landscape and interior that gave mystery and worked on large levels to large diverse audiences. On the interior, we renovated the entire museum. And in that, we're thinking really deeply about what are those empathic moments that connect. We know those special moments when we go to public spaces, when we connect with others, or we see other perspectives. We wanted to make sure to create those spaces, and not only in programming, but also in the sharing of information. At the top left, you can see this idea of what we call the scientific hotspot or scientific Times Square, where the sharing of information was held in a very public manner. Also, this idea of programming that really talked about challenges that could turn into design opportunities, a space called the challenge zone that you see in the middle. The idea is you could come in and actually play and build and solve or think deeply about an issue. We also worked all throughout Canada where we would produce exhibitions that would travel. Part of this idea was to make these moments incredibly accessible, but thinking deeply about different audiences. Within that, this is the Power of Ideas tour, which is part of the Canada 150 celebration. This idea that we traveled about physics, and then this idea you could move through and understand physics through the exhibition. It also would encourage young people from all over the country to become into the field of physics as well.
Hey, Elgin, pardon me for interrupting. I'm going to move to Wi-Fi. I don't know if this is going to disturb the presentation or even participants. I'm plugged in at work, but everything's herky-jerky, which means it's recording that way too, which is unfortunate. So if we just pause for a moment, sure. I'm going to try to do a little switch. So I'm just warning everybody there might be a little disruption. And then if you get kicked off or kicked out, just give it a minute and then pop back in. So I apologize, everybody. Hopefully this will be a quick fix. Okay, so Elgin, I'm gonna hand it back to you. It looks like I've got a cleaner signal now. So you can get started again. And I apologize again for the interruption. Thanks for everyone's patience.
No worries. A lot of my work focuses on what I call architectural empathy. Again, removing the E is this idea of removing high sense of self or the ego in the design process so that we can open ourselves to new radical and new forms of connection with each other and the world. This also is an embracing of objects, nature, the reimagination, the exercise that we did at the beginning, where you think about yourself being within this system of layers of actual space, which helps us rethink public space. The work of Susan Lanzoni talks about this and the idea of empathy as a history, but I've also been really fortunate to be here in Charlottesville since 2016. And after the events that happened here in 2017 and coming back to the school of which I learned architecture, thinking as an alum, but also just as a human in this space, I established Empathic Design. It's the pedagogy, the initiative, and practice that Kyle had mentioned before. Been very successful in creating spaces that not only produce designs, the way we think in the classroom, but also in workshops. And the idea too here is to really think about the design process as a wide and inclusive one. In my work, I really privilege the human. I recognize how people are seen and acknowledged in spaces through their layers of identity, culture, history, memory, and place. I believe that emotions you have in these layers are valid, and in them we feel as we do in relationships, welcoming us or rejecting us as a family or a friend. The forms, the symbols, materials, scale, and the built environment all play a role in setting these relationships. And it culminates in deeper relationships with nature and the land. Empathic designs, therefore, are visual representations of inclusive mental imagination, and ultimately reestablish trust through connective encounter. That trust is incredibly important in spaces, in public spaces. These designs are iterative, they change, they shift with us, and in them, our emotions arise, they bump up against us. Lands acknowledged, and so are the relationships to time. Empathic design says, we see you, and we are here. As I mentioned before, being a student at the University of Virginia, I thought about this deeply in a sense of place. It's amazing to be back here now and to shift thinking about the academical village, the design, Jefferson's design ideas, the space itself, the time, and then to visit the memorial to enslaved laborers. Students also too are seeing this fold, this compression of time and place to really think then deeply about who we are, where we are now, and ideas for the future. When I came back, one of the big reasons of returning was this actual map on the left-hand side of the screen. It's a walking tour produced by the President's Commission on Slavery in the University, students, faculty, and staff, to walk through the academical village and learn about the enslaved African Americans. The life legacies you learn as you move throughout the academical village following that plan. I picked that up in this brand new space where at the bottom of the rotunda, there's an exhibition space. And noticing that moving through from the brick that you see that's ubiquitous here in Virginia to thinking about the materials of the slate above, that there's a connection that can be made, an empathic one. Each material is touched or made by hand. Who made it? How do you define those spaces as you learn through the tour? It always stuck with me as a student to think about walking through the gardens themselves, which were done by in this manner you see on the left and this way we see them now, but the way they really were, which is you see on the right. And this is Jefferson's University of Early Life, created these amazing 3D renderings of what actually were in the spaces, in the garden spaces themselves. I would stand in those gardens and you see a flower, but I would hear a hog being butchered in my mind, the day-to-day of the enslaved, the height difference of the serpentine walls from the height that they were of 8 feet, which is captured in the memorial to enslaved laborers, to what you see now as a lowered height. What I realized at that time was give an opportunity to create and think about design. And we won a Jefferson Trust Award for this work to produce an exhibition called Mapping. It's one of the highlights of my life to have an exhibit inside the rotunda itself, and this is in the West Oval Room. We were able to feature and also join this system of delivery that already exists to take the work that's in the tour and place it along the wall inside of the space, as well as a section of a roof. The roof section comes down to the ground. If you see the way it's read there, it actually shifts around the opposite direction from the perspective of the builder. I thought a lot about the enslaved, making the material, how the material get here from its location in Buckingham County, and the idea too to take that material across the top. And you can see across the top, those top 3 pieces were actually donated from the university, and those are actual pieces that the enslaved made and brought and installed. Those bottom pieces were actually pieces that I was able to get from the university, also of newer slate, which we etched the plan, which you can see here on the left-hand side. You enter this room in the West Oval Room. You came and you pick up one of the tour pamphlets. You read the information on the wall, and off you go to learn and understand this landscape, the compression that you have of past, present, and future. It's really excited here too. We included this in our inclusion and equity open houses, also to make sure and provide opportunities to diversify our field of architecture and design. And you can see students here from Morgan State who were during our inclusion and equity open house in the bottom picture. A lot of my work, I'm very fortunate, I've contacted from organizations looking for empathic thinking. One of those projects is the John Henry James Memorial, or the Charlottesville Memorial for Peace and Justice here in Charlottesville. I'll give a bit of background on this, and I'll read this from Brendan Wolfe. He's written an incredible article called The Train at Woods Crossing. We're right now, if you look at that image in the center, we're just west of Charlottesville, right in front of Farmington Country Club. So on the morning of July 11th of 1898, Julia Huttop, then 20 years old, reported to have been assaulted by a black man near the gate of her family's estate in Penn Park. It's about 2.5 miles east of Charlottesville. She noticed there's something off with the gate to the plantation. She freed the gate, but as she turned to remount her horse, someone approached her from behind and struck her. She grasped by the neck, forcing her to the ground when she became unconscious. John Henry James was arrested at Dudley's Barroom on East Main Street. According to the paper, he answered somewhat the description of Miss Huttop's assailant. He was taken to Staunton for protection from the crowds in Charlottesville at the jail. On the way back, at Woods Crossing, about 4 miles west of Charlottesville, the train slowed for a scheduled stop. An armed mob between 100 and 150 white men, their faces uncovered, gathered at the crossing, located on the edge of an estate owned by Warner Wood. In front of a blacksmith shop, the mob spied a small but sturdy locust tree with a limb hanging about 10 feet off the ground. 20 or 30 revolvers rang out on the morning air, and the body of the wretch was perforated with perhaps 40 or 50 bullets, according to an account in the Lexington Gazette. Carl Huttop arrived on the scene about 10 minutes later and emptied his revolver in James's body. It's the only perpetrator who is mentioned by name in the account, and the body was meant to hang and left to hang until 3:30 that afternoon. Thinking about the location here, and I was contacted by Siri Russell of the Albemarle County Office of Equity and Inclusion to think about a location for the marker, and I'll show you where the marker from EJI, the Equal Justice Initiative, would sit in the city. But first, I walked and I sighted myself, which is one of my practices here in Charlottesville, learning as much as I could, much as I can about each day in space, but also really thinking deeply about our public spaces, which have public and also international knowledge. This idea of Vinegar Hill, a once thriving African-American community to the left, looking at this map of Charlottesville, the downtown mall itself, but also thinking about ideas of elevation when you get to the top, to Court Square, where you can see highlighted. At the time, I lived in the downtown mall, also there presently during the 2017 events that happened here in Charlottesville. Within that, I mean, a lot of sitting and sighting inside of the space at Court Square Park and thinking deeply about its relationships and how architecture makes you feel in this space. A lot of my research looks at the ideas of German aesthetics, of Einfühlung, this idea of feeling into. And when I would sit here in the space, then of the Confederate statues, really registering not only the messaging behind them, but also empathically how it feels. But then to take that map it over with location, looking out to what has been marked in the space beyond the cannons, beyond the markings themselves, to also think about nature in this space and those massive trees. How do you think about this idea of the representational spaces and the ruptures in memory, opacities in history, and fractures of remembering? I took a trip, as all designers do, to see other amazing buildings and to think about their relationships and how they set them up. The National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. really sets up a relationship with the White House, with the National Mall, with the sites that used to be there, the location of the wharf that used to be near the location of the building, to also think deeply about the idea of Blackness within the urban landscape. Within this, too, is this idea of setting up relationships between yourself and with other objects, other places, prompting, with sometimes subtle ways and nuances, this empathic connection. The museum does this in a masterful way. Within that, too, to really think about the fact that over the next century, from the events of John Henry James's lynching, was largely forgotten, and was included with about 4,400 other lynchings here at the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. Encouraged by the memorial's creator, the Equal Justice Initiative, citizens of Charlottesville and Albemarle County gathered soil from the site of Woods Crossing, which you can see down at the bottom, located through the efforts of historian Jane Smith. It's taken into Montgomery in exchange for a coffin-shaped pillar, which is the new centerpiece of the lynching memorial. You can see the path at the top down to Montgomery, but the idea here is that John Henry James, the soil, but then also to the coffin-sized column. Thinking deeply about these materials, I thought about the site itself at Court Square. You can see on the left the actual panel that was installed, and it actually speaks of the lynching of John Henry James, but also the coffin-sized marker you can see here on the right. A lot of this is really in concert with the incredible system of delivery here. It was happening here in the city at the time, but incredible tours such as those by Schmidt and Douglas of marking these monuments. None of this work is by itself, it's by a larger idea of community. And a lot of community feedback gave the idea where the marker would go in the space. At the time, there was the Confederate soldier at number 3, located in the space at Court Square, but also at 5, they did the Stonewall Jackson statue there as well. But when I thought of the design, I wanted to make sure that you had this connection between the materials, yourself, your body, and the world around you. So at 0 there is the number nothing storefront, which also held the slave auction block here in Charlottesville. Placing the John Henry James marker across, but also you can see in that reddish color in the center, that is the body column at number 8. The material below that you would stand on is the slate that actually connects back to the mapping project, but also is the same slate that's at the university and ubiquitous also in Washington, D.C., but also from Buckingham County for its prized beauty. Monticello signs number 2. And at 9 there, those were the possible public hanging and whipping posts that happened here in this space. The thing about the relationship too, about John Henry James and this space, but then also setting up relationships. And when you look in the distance, you could actually see these moments back to, as you turn around, to the other monuments at the time. You can see how that reads. The tall piece here, the middle, where you would come up and see the memorial. On that too, you're stepping on the slate. All of a sudden, there's a new way of thinking about that relationship. And over to the side, the lynching of John Henry James, actual information on the historical marker. Within this space, you get a real understanding too, where you're starting to look out, others are looking at you, and you look back to the actual statues and also back to the courthouse in a new and different way. And this is the view looking back out toward Monticello in the distance. People across the street there is where the original location of the slave market is there, off to the historical sign. Now there's a new relationship between you, and it's that moment where literally it's coming up against you, it's in front of you, and at that actual scale, the 6 feet of the body column relates to your body. Two trees right next to you too make evoke and think about the idea of the lynching that occurred. But now there's another relationship within the space and redefining the space to tell a Black narrative. This is the installation day of the historical panel in the space here too. The large column is still to come. I'm going to continue. I've got all Virginia stories here purposely to really think about this idea of empathic design being a Virginia-born concept and idea. I want to move to this project in Martinsville, Virginia. And over the past 2 years, UVA has been implementing a smart and connected communities research coordination network grant in Martinsville. It's led by Professors Mona El-Kafif and Professors Isla Berman. Been really fortunate to work on the design team on a project we call We Are Martinsville. It's a pilot project which uses place-based sites and community partnerships to turn Martinsville into a playable city for residents and visitors from all age groups. As I mentioned, this mobile game app is developed by an interdisciplinary team from UVA School of Architecture, School of Medicine, community representatives. But over the past 3 years, the game is developed in several stages, and it offers a game narrative for continuous game content authored by community stakeholders and local institutions. The game itself really talks and speaks to Martinsville's rich history and its urban fabric and its range of partly discovered or discovered community assets and resources. It sets up incredible game fields, and the idea here is that it allows players to learn about their city. It's a motivator for both indoor and outdoor exploration. You get new knowledge and data about Martinsville, and also you get to move, which is really good for us all now more than ever. Key features here, you can check in, and they're quizzes, and you can see this is an early idea we had for moving ourselves from Martinsville's downtown. You can check in with the quizzes and get award points to players for visiting locations or getting close to the locations. And you answer questions that require you to be on site. So you have to be there on site to get your points. And these features motivate players to visit less popular places considered valuable by the community they might not visit otherwise. I can say that Uptown Pinball was incredibly popular too. It gets players physically active, and this activity is also tracked. So you can also see how many miles you traveled, but also nearby players, time played, and steps taken. We all know that feeling at the end of the day when you check how many steps you took. So it's a great reward and also a health metric at the same time. You can see here too, just an overshot that shows you some of the ideas of the game field in downtown Martinsville, uptown Martinsville. So you can take photos of your community also and supply feedback to game administrators who can relay information to city planners. This information can add walking paths, fix unsafe spaces, create scavenger hunts, or share areas of pride in the community. These are also combined into stories and events. And we tested this out with the Virginia Natural History Museum there in town. And it really becomes a fun way. And we got here mostly because of these workshops. We partnered with our partner network, and we connected with the Boys and Girls Club to find out at the New College Institute some ideas on local assets, usage, local heroes, civic treasures, and desired additions to Martinsville. I also learned that it is possible to have a 26-hour FaceTime phone call, which I never could imagine in a million years happening. But the idea too is we wanted to understand from all the incredible young designers here, your connection with mobile and also with the city itself. We had icebreaker activities. We presented our mission and vision, but we also set up ideation and a series of empathy-driven inquiry questions. We validated technological use, physical activity, and also personal behaviors. Some of the questions included, how time is spent after school and on the weekends, favorite assets in Martinsville, and the types of phone and time on phones, as I mentioned. All of these feedback that we received, we really were able to create the game cards that you saw earlier, But we also were able to share with our community leaders that we would run a prototype, which we followed several times post-workshop. These are some of the incredible maps that we asked the student designers to create, because we wanted to get an understanding too, empathically, from how all of our designers see the world. And so this really helped us think about that earlier map you saw floating above Martinsville, about scale and also what's important in assets. It's also great too to see the idea of nature connected in these maps. Our second workshop, we work with first responders, educators, community leaders, representatives of cultural institutions, and health practitioners of the partner network. Again, we presented our mission and vision, but we also looked at a collective conversation on future pilot testing and got a lot of great strategic advice on parameters for a successful launch in Martinsville. We actually tested it with the same 15 youth from the Boys and Girls Club. These are kids that were born and raised in Martinsville, to really make sure our site's really connected. It was really great to see too during the testing that some players were aware of sites, but also got new secondary knowledge. Also, kids knew where the public library may be, but maybe they weren't aware of some of the after-school programs the library offered. And so the students explored the library. We're talking to librarians to find out more questions too. Exactly, Rebecca. It was really wonderful to see this new level of engagement. And all of a sudden now you've got this moment where you learn about after-school programs. We really had great follow-up briefs with the youth, because it's always great to get feedback, and it was great to have a real design idea of what colors worked, what felt right, what connected with aspects of the game, but also valuable knowledge and best practices for the update. Excited to say that we're heading back down on next Friday to test the latest game version. And so these were kind of the last moment we had here before completing a design. We worked with Adaptive Health to create these as well. And you can see the colors, everything. I'm looking here and realizing everything here is really a composite of those feedback sessions we had in the community. All the images there we took, or they were taken by student designers and integrated into the game itself. Lastly, I'll move to Darrington and Lynchburg. It's really fortunate to work the Darrington Neighborhood Recreation Plan, Jefferson Park, under request of Ann Nygaard, the city planner, and the urban design team in Lynchburg. I'll read from the plan itself, the idea of the plan. The plan is out now for review. And the goals at the Darrington neighborhood in this part of Lynchburg will be home to safe, interconnected, well-designed park spaces that convey neighborhood history, invite neighbors and Lynchburg citizens to gather, provide high-quality recreation spaces for neighborhood children of all ages. Remnants of the city's past transgressions will be turned on their head, as renewed investment will transform previously neglected spaces into valuable assets. Jefferson Park, specifically the heart of the Darrington neighborhood, will provide opportunities to reflect, remember, and learn, to restore, heal, and build, and for recreation, play of all types. This work will culminate in making Darrington's neighborhood a stronger, healthier, and meaningful place to live. I was asked to come along as a key group and participant in running and design workshops. You can see a lot of my work is really about the thinking process, which helped devise and come up with the ideas of reflect, restore, and recreation. You can see here on the left that the plan was modeled largely on New York City's neighborhood planning playbook, but also plays with some real ideas about design thinking, where you start with organizing, you move on to learning more in the community as well. You create, co-creating together, you finalize your ideas, and then you implement. It's a real classic design thinking way of being. But I would add to this too, this idea of deep empathy to connect, which really comes out in these moments all throughout, but especially in learning and creating. I was really fortunate that Ann Nygaard spoke with me consistently about, in the design team, about this moment and idea in the city itself. But I spent a lot of time visiting the city and doing some deep thinking in the way that I see the world. But right off the top, all the stories I heard about the pool that was in Jefferson Park really just put me into deep study and thinking. The park was once the only pool here for African Americans in Lynchburg. And at the time, public spaces were segregated, and the civil rights movement was making national news. This is from the plan itself. On July 4th, 1961, 7 African Americans showed up at the Miller Park pool, which was only for whites. The leader of the group, Olivet C. Thaxton, demanded that he and 6 boys accompanying him be admitted. News of the demonstration arrived before they did, and the police were already waiting for them. At least one of the activists jumped into the swimming pool, and the white swimmers quickly got out of the pool. As a crowd of people gathered, the police struggled to keep the peace. Rather than to integrate, the city decided to close all the public pools. The pools at Miller Park, Riverside, and Jefferson Park were all closed the same day in 1961. For several years, the pools were drained and stood empty before eventually being filled in, a decision approved by the city manager. Together, the manager and the police chief were fearful of potential violence if the pools were ever reopened. However, 2 new pools were later opened at the local segregated high schools, E.C. Glass and Dunbar. The site of the Jefferson Pool became known as the Deerington Sanitary Fill and was used by the city of Lynchburg as a dump until 1966. It's adjacent to the newly opened public housing. It's also used by Lynchburg residents to burn their Christmas trees after the holidays. Spectators in the Lynchburg Fire Department would gather together and burn trees left over from Christmas. The landfill was then abandoned in 1976 when the city of Lynchburg's Park and Recreation Department opened a community center. Today, the park is open and to a home of basketball and tennis courts, a multi-purpose field, playground equipment, and walking trails. The space that was once a landfill continues to be largely unused. I learned a lot about this, again, from this system of information and knowledge in the city, but also visiting the African American History Museum, the local museums, Lynchburg Museum, but also incredible conversations and learning from Anne and also the Urban Design Group of the previous workshops. But also I visited about 3 or 4 times. And each time I was there, I walked, spoke with residents, sat in the space at the pool, sat in the space of the park, and thought deeply about what would it feel like generationally within this space. This was there, I thought deeply too about the name Deering, Confederate general. I learned about Thomas Randolph Jefferson, who I'll mention in a moment, who donated the actual space, the land of the city, who lived in a log cabin on the site, who always wanted for the Black community to have a park of their own because he was restricted from joining other city parks, and he's in the center. But then I just watched and I observed and tried to understand deeply about how the space is being used and the idea of the connection of the space as well. Noticing that there are incredible views off to the top end of the park, but there's also incredible potential to connect to the existing trail systems in Lynchburg. So as I mentioned, you can see here that the site empathic research included site and city visits, walk in the park and the neighborhood, and reviewing materials from the workshops. I asked further questions within iGuard, but also discovering historical accounts of the site and the assets. I'd also visited Lynchburg's Legacy Museum, as well as the Ann Spencer House and Pierce Street, to really understand the idea of the city itself, but also Black history in the city, which emerge into these themes of community building spirit to frame workshops. Reflect, remember, restore, heal, build, and recreation play. You see that I'll talk a bit about how I created some of these ideas of the workshops, but they were really based off this idea of collectively what we all discovered. The workshop themselves was held in response to COVID-19 outside and had a wonderful idea of having it on the former tennis court in this space. And so we set up COVID safely there, as you can see on the left. It's a photo taken by one of my students, Omer Garashi, great photographer. And the idea was to create a COVID space to really think deeply as you look off in the distance, and you would see that view that we saw from before of the park itself as we're thinking about what can happen. This idea of the method too of empathic design, to site yourself in a location to think about in a deep way, really enhances this idea of you thinking of the public space and being inclusive in creating ideas. And we use the classic design thinking process and the idea for the workshop to identify the needs and wants, to collect research needs and wants, to analyze together, our findings and determine the feasibility, but also ideate, complete, and finalize our ideas, and then eventually build. Goals of the workshop were outlined to start with this idea of deciding improvements for the park under a thought framing of what do you want the park to look like in 20 years. We also suggested other recreation and access improvements, deciding what they are, where they should go. We set priorities for park elements. After the introduction, we had a series of overall comprehensive questions, and you'll see the boards that we created. A lot of this is using this classic idea of making boards, and that's a future great designer there helping put up some of the responses. Everyone were able to write down their ideas on Post-its and bring them up and post them on the board, so we didn't lose anyone's ideas. And just to give you an idea of how that worked, each bit of material to make sure that this would work, we walked around with the boards to really make sure everyone could see and really be involved. These are some of the responses to the questions. The idea of what things do you like in Jefferson Park currently? And you can see this, the trees, the playground, the tennis court, picnic area, pool and lights, baseball field. How do we address the history of the park? Photos and plaques that talk about it, the historical marker, splash pads, annual celebrations, place for Black joy and gathering, and also hosting citywide events. We're really appreciative about the feedback there as you're thinking about the idea of the space itself, but also becoming a space of ritual and dedication, and also connected to the city itself. Part of the ideas under Reflect really spoke to this, the idea of Dearington stories in physical form. And this is also design examples of memorial designs, historical markers, and art. So really at the same time, I had a student in my design studio who is from this very neighborhood and went to the local school, DESI School of Innovation there in the space. So we talked a lot about this idea of bringing back the life and legacy of Thomas Randolph Jefferson, the son of slaves, prominent African-American from Lynchburg, who lived, as I mentioned, on a property in a log cabin. Love this count here that he shook hands with presidents, served banquets to generals, and spent most of his life in the presence of notables. And according to Jefferson family, Lynchburg named the park in his honor in the 1930s, and finding a way to reflect and remember this in designs. You can see here off to the left-hand side, these highlighted moments are actually from the report. And so these were all mounted on a board, and everything that anyone picked, we said these are the design ideas that are important to really bring back. To imagine that a large-scale mural of that incredible moment, that photo you see at the top left in this space, would be a real powerful way to talk about this idea of reflection, but also too to bring back the marking the pool. Other ideas included a chalk wall similar to those you see here in Charlottesville on the downtown mall, seating areas, shade elements, new park welcomes, and historical signage. Also, maybe thing that really became me important to think about here is we wanted to think about ideas that really worked across generations. So storytelling area is really a powerful moment. It kind of goes back to ideas of exhibition design, but the ability to tell a story, to really inform, to create that knowledge that goes through generations with this as well. Temporarily, to think about as an early stage is to mark the location of the pool itself. This is the artist Stacy Levy off to the left. And it could also define the location where the pool was to create a first moment to really recognize and bring back the idea of the memory of the space. It goes back to this idea again of compression and understanding the past, present, and future. But then this would also start to inspire and continue community conversations about what the design could be. Stacey Levy's work is amazing in that here she's actually marking out the water that's actually underground that connects through an orchard. Perhaps this idea of responding to the location of the water and the depth and the scale of it really speaks to this new idea of rethinking in the space. In Restore, we talked about the soul of Jefferson Park and picnic areas, celebrations, nature trail, labyrinth, art, community gardens, becoming a way to connect also with amphitheaters and performance space. Also bringing back these ideas of activities and creating consistent energy in the park. And for recreation, splash pads, interactive fountains, basketball courts, possible gym facilities, golf practicing, fitness, outdoor checkers. the idea here to really connect again with different generations and to think deeply about the idea that this space could be a moment to connect even further for overall happiness of all ages. Here are some images of that part of the workshop. You can see on those boards the images that were marked for each one of the sections of reflect, restore, and recreation. And in this, walked around, got an idea of what was really favorable. This idea really worked really well in the space because we were quickly able to understand and also to connect, what connects with everyone. Here are some of those images for an example. And Anna spoke with me about the idea of a temporary site. And so we thought about some images that really could show what that temporary public space could be on the left. And what I would say is the world's coolest bike rack you could ever imagine on the right. This idea about really amazing moments to think about design. You know, I would look at that and think there could be a great moment to connect with the local school system to design and think about what that could be also, you know. We expanded beyond that too to think about neighborhood ideas and also connecting with destinations such as EC Glass, Jefferson Park's relationship to it, Miller Park, Lynchburg General, and Chambers Street. Thinking about a name change for this space, securing the trails, native plants, meadow, sidewalks, dog parks, but that then expanded out. And so you can see at the beginning of the workshop, we started at a smaller scale, but then we expanded out to think about the city itself. And so if you'll check now on the city's website, you'll find that the report is there for feedback. On it, you can see the short-term actions over to the one side, which include that temporary park at the end, but also the idea of a 20-year conception plan, which really holds the space itself. Part of the idea here too is to really now think about the space as just that, bringing back the past, to think about the present and also support in the future. But I was really excited to be a part of this project, and we're still going forth now to get feedback on the plan itself. Thank you, Andrea. So I'll stop there so there's time for Q&A, but I just wanted to share with you all how much I appreciated showing you some of our Virginia stories and work I've been really fortunate to be a part of, and I hope that was helpful for y'all.
Elgin, so many things are swirling through my head. I love the way you closed this out, and with some of those examples. You know, thank you so much for sharing that with us. You know, the empathy, I feel it, I see it in the way you've embraced that, and then what even the final design concepts look like. This is really cool. I do want to back up a little bit and unpack, because we just, our brains are full. So let's see if we might be able to pull it apart a little bit and figure out a few essential elements. But I'm curious, you know, what are the essential elements we need to know about empathic design? So what, you know, just going back and unpacking a little bit, what are those essential elements that we need to know?
Sure. I think one of them is first is a real awareness of ourselves, and we understand our position, who we are, but also just to kind of stop. And that exercise at the beginning was really one of the key ones, is to stop and to really start to think about the world from other perspectives. And I think that requires you to take a breath, kind of reposition yourself and ground, and really start to tap into your imagination. A lot of this is about imagining and asking those questions. And a lot of my work, I focus on the mind, the hand, and the body. The mind is to stop and go, all right, wait a minute. This is maybe how I experience it. Who was here before? How did I? Start to ask yourself those larger inquiry questions, which really start to set up the world from another perspective. In hand, I think really deeply about everything that's built. And I started asking, okay, how did that get here? Who did this? How did this happen? I mean, it's that moment where, your kids start asking you lots of questions about why. And I think we get to a point where we kind of stop. And so bring those back in a way. And then lastly, when you're looking at body, right? What's my relationship between me and someone else? I think the most beautiful thing is when someone says to you, I don't see it that way. And you start thinking, well, wait, what is it that you see? And if you're thinking about spaces, that's really the key to really connect. That project in Martinsville is a really great example where, we would walk around and we would see the students and see the city through their eyes. which shifts just your perspective. And that skill is to push yourself as much as possible to hear other perspectives. And so I do that as a practice, from podcasts to movies to conversations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that engagement piece and asking the right questions, or the planning, the research part, is really where so much of the power of a final product comes from. Allowing the opportunity for brainstorm from as many individuals as possible, to capture the breadth of the history or the breadth of experience and participation. That stuff excites me, by the way. So you've referenced design thinking several times, and I'm wondering if you might be able to tell us how empathic design is different from design thinking.
Sure, happy to. A lot of my work, I'm pretty specific in shifting from just a business related understanding of design thinking. I'm well aware of the fact that design thinking is very exciting, because it just is. It's exciting to create and work and connect together. But in my work, my goals are really about equity and inclusion, and also design justice. And so it's shifting it to just how we think collectively together. One of my favorite design logic systems is by Kees Dorst at the University of Technology in Sydney. He has an idea about the aspired values that we create. And so once you set those aspired values, you work backward to think about how you're going to go about it, your courses of action, into what you've identified. And so one way to think about the shift from a kind of more capital-based idea of design thinking to one just of how we work and collect together is to think about it that way. If your aspired goals are to create a space that's really about inclusion and equity, you're going to go about it and set in that way. What that means, though, I think is really important, is to set together what those aspired values are, and then you know what you're working toward.
Yeah, I agree. I've really, and this makes me think of this, that appreciative inquiry is a great place to start, to ask this question that really is aspiring to, what if we created this space that was inclusive, honored history of all people in the area? What would that look like? And having people really think about, all the elements that have to come into that. What is the ideal process for including citizens in the design process? And is that the same as what is doable, say, by a small grassroots organization? If not, what are your thoughts on that?
I think I look at every interaction a bit differently. It's almost like when you're inviting people to your house and you think about how you set and you design and create that space. And so I always like to collectively research what would work and to think about it that way. I think it's not the same in every connection, but I think it's important to kind of pull back and think, all right, what feels comfortable here? What feels comfortable in this situation? What are the stages?
Yeah.
So I think one of the ways to look at that is to say that's not the same every time, but perhaps it's something that you have to shift. But I would say at the core, the idea that we worked at in Darrington really speaks to this idea of understanding, organizing yourself. How do you learn? How do you create? And then how do you come up with those questions and move forward is a real great framework to have. I think it's the way you set the table and how you serve is what shifts for each time. Clearly, I'm hungry. So I'm talking about that right now.
Yeah, I can identify. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. That's helpful. And are there? Do you think there are any resources, or do you know of any resources that might help to at least provide that framework, or some very simple step-by-step steps that a community development organization might use? I mean, we're talking about volunteers and laymen. What kind of resources are out there that maybe help them make that engagement process, the data gathering process, a little easier to understand?
Sure. The New York City playbook is a really great place to look. The community playbook, it really steps you through, and it shifts as you look through it. You'll see that it has some of the framework of design thinking, but it shifts it to another kind of space. But I would say that's a really great place to start. It's
Yeah.
also good to kind of take that and compare it to the work that Ann Nygaard was leading at in Darrington to see a Virginia example.
Yeah. Thank you. You know, I'm going to back up a little bit because one of my colleagues shot this to me. You know, I consider myself an empath. Just my personality style. It's the way I am. That's why I'm good at facilitating, I guess. I don't know, you know, the way I like to connect to the people that I'm working with. But I've never heard of empathic design. So how is it that you find yourself as this expert in the field? How did you get there?
Oh, I appreciate you saying expert, but I would just say that maybe I'm a human being that has always seen things that, I guess, in a way that I've always thought that was kind of peculiar. But then I realized that through my lived experience as a Black man and into the design field, I would see things in a shifting way. It's always something I've always wondered when I come to a space. The first question I always ask is, what happened here? And so I always want to go back and learn more. And I think it's one of the gifts of living where you realize that the more you start to understand and ask these questions, the more you discover. And for me, it's just always excited me. So I think for me, I just feel really fortunate. I feel like I'm on a larger moment, and what a gift to be back in the space that I learned and be with students who are doing this themselves, to think about how do you expand and how do you think about the world. I mean, it's one of the key things about design. We know how much design affects us, how much it controls, shapes us, positive and negative ways. But now at this point, where we're rethinking every system, every conversation, every moment we have, it's a real design opportunity to think about this empathically, to really think deeper.
Yeah. I think more than ever now that we need to be able to do that. You used the word comfortable at some point in describing the process. But what do you think of uncomfortable questions being incorporated into the process? And do you know where I'm going with this?
Well, I think maybe my definitions of things are shift a bit, because comfort for me always has a bit of question in it. So I think that's it's more of idea of holding space. Perhaps too, in that idea of comfort is that it's not my comfort. It's more about thinking about what makes another person comfortable. And so it's about that projection, the oscillation back and forth. Within that, it's the keys too about doing no harm and sharing resources. And also creating a co-designing together. So I think once you're always thinking outside yourself, you're doing that projection back and forth.
Yeah. Okay. You went about in a little different way. And I agree with you that you do have to set up the space to be comfortable for people to really open up and offer their, their input or their experience or their knowledge of history, whatever it might be. But that also opens the door to have some of those, maybe those uncomfortable conversations of race inequity and just, tough conversations about our history. But you have to have a space that feels safe in order to get to those tougher questions to talk about. Would you agree, or what? How might you take that a little bit further?
I agree. I think it's more of a question though about this project itself and what does it raise. I mean, I think I always kind of pull back and hesitate a bit until knowing what the project is, what are the conditions. I think real empathic design is to kind of wait and analyze first before you assess what would define that space.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, our time is going by so quickly. There is a quick question that's about the Martinsville Initiative, where we might learn more about that.
No worries. I can actually post in the chat a recent paper we wrote on it. Let's see. Perhaps maybe I could give that to you afterward, Kyle,
Do
but
that.
I could give you the link that has it.
Yeah,
And
Elgin, and actually
it's a
that's
difference.
perfect. If you send that to me, that's one of those great pieces that can be included and follow up with blog posts and so forth that we had talked about. So that's great. With this, back to Martinsville, you mentioned this game field. So what platform is employed to create that experience? Is it customized, or is it something that already exists that's accessible for download or subscription? What
Sure.
do you know about that?
It was customized, the platform we worked with
Okay.
Adaptive Help to create, but soon it will be downloadable through Apple, through UVA apps as well.
Okay.
But, we worked, right now we're doing that last kind of testing on locations to make sure that, when you're standing in the right spot, the right question pops up, which is always important. Exactly.
That'd be great to experience. Related to that, in Danville, the River District Association uses Districts, the app called Districts. And they've created several different tours of those as a civil rights tour of downtown Danville, and it's self-guided. In order to use Districts, they have beacons set up around town that connect to it. So it helps you tell the story. It's very similar, though maybe not as expansive as what you put together, but that is something that's very accessible. And so for those who are very curious about those kinds of things, you can check out Districts and see what Danville is doing. Thank you. I think we have some follow-up. We'll put some information up on the website about empathic design. Would love to have a copy of your slides so we could post that along with the recording. But Elgin, I want to thank you so much. I think I could probably talk to you for the next hour or so, but hey, we have other things to do, and it wouldn't include everybody in that. So thank you so much for being here and sharing this just wonderful information about just being able to really tell a rich history, but then also provide a space that is comfortable, interesting, and attracts visitors and locals. So this is an incredible perspective. I appreciate that. So I'm going to bring up my slides real quick, Elgin. Thank you so much for being here. And everyone, if you have any questions or would like to reach out to him, his presentation will be posted on the website soon. I'll get that up for you. Let's see, what am I doing? I'm sharing a tab.
Well, thank you, everybody. I just want to say thank you to everyone for attending. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here, and I want to learn more. I think I've just scratched the surface with this, and I think a lot of others have. But I'm being an urban planner myself, the engagement piece is so important in any of the work we do in community and in an economic development. And you can see here, this is a great example of how that works. So thank you for getting us all thinking about designing public spaces for and with the people who use them. But thanks for everyone for taking the time out to be here today. You can find information about the Community Vitality series on virginiamainstreet.com, where you can also learn about downtown management best practices, local stories, funding opportunities, and upcoming events across the Commonwealth. So sign up to receive posts in the bottom right-hand corner of the landing page. Upcoming on October 18th is a podcast with Lindsay Wallace, Director of Strategic Projects and Design Services for the National Main Street Center. So we'll keep this public spaces conversation going. In November, we'll focus on cultural promotion and events, and a webinar with Nicole Martorana, who works with teams to deliver memorable promotions and programming, and an inspiring podcast with Kirsten Moore, owner of Harrisonburg's The Perch at Magpie, a unique co-working center. If you have any questions, please reach out to DHCD's Community Revitalization Office staff. Contact information and tons of community building resources are available on the DHCD website. and Virginia Main Street blog. Hyperlinks are active in the webinar handout. So thank you everyone for being here, and be well. We look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you, Kyle. I just also found the link to that Martinsville paper and put it in the chat.
Perfect. And I'll make sure that we incorporate that into some upcoming blog posts.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Elgin.
Thank you all.
Enjoy your fall.